In this video, we're going to start to set up our second area of our first-person puzzle, which is our pit. So what we already have working is we go into here. We have this pit right here. We try to jump into the pit and get across, and we're stuck. This is kind of like a soft lock. This is a broken game. This is not good. You know, this is a really good way to have a player get frustrated. Video games shouldn't work by the player having to actually quit or exit out of the program to try again or restart. So what we want to put into this pit is a real simple kind of reload. We're going to look at a couple options for that. But we're also going to explore one of the challenges that we have to deal with this reload. Now the other, I guess, thing to point out, this would be an example of one of our mechanical puzzles eventually when we talk about how we actually solve this. We're going to use the crates to kind of stack them up in order to jump across the pit. And that's going to let us actually create an actual puzzle, a little bit of a challenge for the player. Now, other things to point out, this will happen a little bit more as we move forward, but right now it's not a big deal to get to this next area. I can put this one stag on here and I'm good to go. Eventually, you're going to have 2 or 3 or 4 puzzles that can really start to be time consuming. So as a reminder, you can use these 3 dots and change it to current camera location. And that way when you hit play, you just play the game for wherever you're actually viewing the game. So if I was over here, I would play it from right here. Just kind of a nice way to make testing your game a little bit more seamless. So anyway, let's get going. What we want to do is in the bottom of this pit, there's actually already a trigger box set up for you. And it's actually laid out a pretty good amount to make sure no matter where the player falls in, the game can reload. So what I want to do is I want to open the level blueprint, and I'm going to do I'm actually going to find my other events, just kind of try to keep things organized. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to do a begin overlap. And there's a few ways to do this. I could do an open level by object name or by object reference, and I can select the name of my level, main level, like this. Now what I have working now is, let's see if I hit play here. If I fall in, what should happen? My level reloads. Now there's actually a problem to this though. If I do this, and actually I'll show this from here. Perfect. Cool. So if I do this, and again if I jump in, it's actually not too bad, right? It reloads. You can see that reload fired. But in order to get across, I need to use these crates. And what's very likely to happen is the player could be setting up a crate, and maybe they bump into it and the crate falls down. And what just happened? The level reloaded. So what we can do is use casting to make sure that the only thing that's going to activate that reload is going to be the character. So I'm actually going to alt-click to break that link, or what you could do is right-click, break this link. And I'm going to cast to my character. My character is called first-person character. How do I know that? Well, if I looked in my level, and I start to look at things like the game mode, I can start to see that the default pawn is set here as the character. It's actually even, I guess, more obvious. If I just look in my first person and blueprints, I can see there's only one character in here, so it's the first person character. But it's an important thing to realize that if you're going to do some programming that uses your character, you're going to have to know what your character is, right? That's defined typically in your game mode, but there are other places that you can try to find it. It's where that default pawn is. So what I want to do, back to my level, is I want to cast to my first person character. Not the game mode, not the class, just the character. And as we did before, I want this only to occur if it was the character that fell in. What do I want to happen if it was the character? I want to open the level. Cool. So I'll hit compile, and I'll hit play. And I can test it from here. So I go into here. Nope, that was a good miss. Games are hard. I go into here. I start to set this up. Whoops. You can see it stops right at that cast. But if I jump in, it reloads the level. Now, other ways that people reload levels are by setting the location. So sometimes what you'll see people do rather than open the level is you can do set actor location. For this, the target could be the character, like so. And then you'd have to just set a good X, Y, or Z for the character. We'll see what happens if where 0, 0, 0 is. I might be kind of off in nowhere here in a second. This is more of like a checkpoint for your game. Let's see what happens. Oh, yeah, not too bad. I'm over here in the corner. This has the advantage of not resetting everything in your level. So sometimes what you want to have happen is when the player loses, you don't want to put them all the way back to the beginning, or you don't want to have everything in the rooms reset. You just want it to almost feel like more of a teleport. And that's what this would do. So that just kind of put me up in the air, and now I'm falling back in. Whoops. So that's one way to do it. And again, that was because I changed that Z to be pretty high right there. But if it was 0, 0, 0, it would just put me to 0, 0, 0, which is, let's see, we can confirm that, 0, 0, 0, like so. Sometimes what I like to do is move an object to kind of see where the good location would be. So it looks like it's 240, 120, and then 0. So if I set this to 240, 120, and 0, what would happen would be my character would end up right there if I fell in that pit. So again, we'll put the fox up here. Go for it. Cool. Now you can see I'm right here. Kind of low, but actually stuck on the ground. So that's kind of a problem. Oh, jump saved me there. Anyway, so that would be how you would use that. For us, honestly, the reload's probably a little better, because what will happen with the reload is the if there's any issues with like the boxes or the foxes or the stags, the reloads will do a nice job of resetting the whole puzzle and preventing some other soft locks from occurring. So it actually just kind of really gives us a blank start, a fresh canvas for the player to try to solve the puzzle. Now later on, what you'll see in some of our videos, what you could do when the character falls in, you could provide some feedback. So when I jump in, what might happen is, rather than just immediately going in, what you might want to do is pop a little delay right here. This is like one of the easiest ways to give feedback I have found. So I'll make it kind of long, 0.5. It might be too long, we'll see. And I'll hit play, and I'll go in. And what this will do is, rather than being like an immediate teleport, I'm going to fall in, and I kind of have to think about it for a little bit. That could probably even be longer. I thought it was going to be too short. Now, I kind of like this in my games. It's kind of like if the player loses, they should have to kind of think about losing for at least a moment. And then they'll be back on their way of trying again. So it's not like a slow iteration, but it kind of forces them to think a little bit. You know, other things you might want to do is you could put a widget and say, like, you lost. You could have like a lose tracker that pops up every single time the player loses. You could do a screen fade, so it could fade to red or fade to black before opening a level. Camera shake is a great way to give feedback. There's all these little kind of nuanced ways you can let the player know something happened, and we start talking about that in terms of feedback, right? Now, the other thing I didn't mention earlier were how we could prevent the player from getting stuck down here. This trigger box is pretty successful. There's no way the player can fall down there and not reload the level. It really can't happen. So what we could do, rather than have it be a trigger box, sometimes it'll be more of a mechanical avoidance of a soft lock. So you could have like a staircase that's down there and kind of leads the player back up to this side. It could be a staircase that somehow leads them back over to here. So sometimes you can have these like physical ways of letting the player restart. But personally, because this is the first challenge, the player's just trying to learn the game, I think this kind of fall in a pit and reload really does a good job of serving like the reset purpose. So it just works really well for us. So I'm not going to show how we beat the puzzle. I've kind of hinted towards a little bit. Those are things you'll figure out in class. But again, the idea is you can stack these boxes. I guess I am just showing it. And you can kind of use it to jump across to the next room. Once we get over to here, what we want to do is we want to set up our character to actually open the door. Now for us, what we have already over here is a trigger box, door to trigger. So I'm going to begin overlap, if I could type. There we go, we did it. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to cast to the first person character. This casting will kind of be second nature by the end of this. You'll just get a really good hang of it. I'm also going to set up my end overlap because I just know I'm going to need that. So I'm going to do cast to first person character. Cool. I'll say other actor, looking good. I'm going to reference this door this time, and I'm going to do the custom events of open door up top, and then close door on the bottom. Pretty cool. So it kind of reuses what we did in the previous challenge, but using a trigger box rather than the puzzle pieces of our statue. So rather than having to beat the whole thing, we're going to make sure on camera location, I'm going to hit play. So I go into the trigger box, the door opens. If I exit the trigger box, the door closes. I really like the exiting to close because what that'll do is when I go into the next room, what happens? The door closes and the player's kind of forced to progress forward. So it really kind of controls the puzzles in your game. If you leave that door open, what you're running the risk of is the player backtracking. Or if they're kind of stumped by a puzzle in here, they may think they have to go back to solve the puzzle. So by actually closing this door, it actually gives a really good piece of feedback to the player that whatever they're doing next has to happen in this room. That basically concludes our second room. It actually concludes really like the class follow-along portion of this. Everything else will be up to you to design your own puzzle in this room.